So here's sort of a neat, fun, and simple activity you can do just to sort of get a sense of an introduction to biblical studies. Let's say you're wondering about hell, and of course this is a concept that draws a lot of attention and discussion. So I did this activity several years ago for the first time, and it really kind of opened up my mind a bit to how we do biblical studies and some of the conclusions that we can and should draw concerning, specifically in this case, the idea of hell. And this one's relatively simple. It's never as simple as this, but what you can do is you can use some online platforms like Blue Letter Bible or Bible Gateway, but it's even better if you have a concordance for a specific translation. So I like to use, so I have a concordance for the NASB translation, and I like that one because the NASB is, it's meant to be as literal as it can possibly be, as literal as you can get when you're translating from an ancient language into a modern one. So what you can do is you can start by the idea of hell. You can look up where is hell mentioned in the Bible. So you can look up the word in the concordance. So you find hell, and what you'll see is references to where it is in the Bible, and it'll give you specifically a reference to words from the original languages of Hebrew and or Greek. Okay. Now in this case with the NASB, what I found is you'll see that there are 13 references, so 13 uses of the English word hell in the Bible, all in the New Testament. Some versions will have more. So maybe some older versions might have some uses of the term hell in the Old Testament and some others in the New Testament. And the reason that you don't see this in the NASB and other modern versions is because, so anywhere that you might see the word hell in English in the Old Testament would likely be a translation of the word Sheol, which is really what biblical scholars know is that this is nothing like the concept of hell that we have in like our modern Western culture. And so Sheol it's no longer translated as hell. It's usually just left as Sheol. Similarly, there's another term in the New Testament, Hades, which in some versions might be translated into hell, but typically now that's not done for the same reason. It's a Greek mythology term, and we kind of have a sense of what that means, and it's really not equivalent to the modern understanding or anything like the modern understanding of the way that Christians think about hell. So what we have are 13 places where hell is used, that word hell is used, and it's almost entirely in the Gospels. So there are two references in letters, one in James, one in 2 Peter. The one in 2 Peter, again, very similarly to the term Hades, the Greek word is Tartarus, which is a pretty clear reference to Greek mythology terms. And so we have a sense of what that would mean in Greek context. So other than that, the other 12 references are all the same word that are used. And of course, the 11 of those 12 references are in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and actually not John. So the word that's used, and this is pretty well known at this point, but the word that's used, translated into hell in the New Testament, is Gehenna. And this is a reference, and you should see this if you use a concordance. You should see a note that explains where Gehenna, the Greek word, is coming from. And it's basically a transliteration of a Hebrew term, Gai Hinnom, which basically it just means the valley of Hinnom. So we can go back to that in a second. First thing to note is what do these passages in the New Testament say in English? So you'll notice these gospel passages basically have themes concerning fire. In some cases, it's some place where somebody is cast into. And there are a couple of passages that kind of just describe it as a state of being. So you are a child of hell, or there are characteristics of hell, things like this. So I think two important things to notice when you read these passages is, one, there's no definition or some sort of clear idea that's provided about what hell is exactly. And so the other thing is, it seems like there's some underlying assumption about what hell is that is already kind of that's already kind of there as a part of the culture. So if we want to try to get a better sense of what this means, the concept of hell, we can go back to this idea of the Valley of Hinnom, and you should be able to find, whether it's in the concordance or otherwise, some references to what the Valley of Hinnom is or where it's mentioned. And the most important reference, or the most helpful one, is in Jeremiah chapter 7. I think it's verses 31 and 32. And it talks about how people were burning children as sacrifices. And so this is the connection that's being made now with this idea of hell coming from the Old Testament. What we're seeing here is Gehenna is a reference to the Valley of Hinnom, where children were burned as sacrifices. And so that makes sense why we would see a lot of the references in the Gospels as sort of describing fire or being burned up or something like this. And so what we get then is, and this is far from making it clear what the idea of hell meant to the people of Jesus's culture, but what we see at least is sort of an allusion to this imagery of this valley where children were being burned up. And this is obviously bad, but it doesn't really give us much in terms of what hell literally means. It really seems like it's something like a metaphor. It's drawing up these images of the essence of this horrible place, this Valley of Hinnom. And so just in terms of a brief word study like this one, we can't get a very clear idea of what the biblical authors necessarily mean by the idea of hell. This is where biblical scholars need to and have done a lot of work into the cultural context. And I actually just recently did a book review on Bart Ehrman's book, Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife. And he does this. He goes very much in depth into the contemporary literature for Jews and Christians and how they described hell and the kind of the conclusions we can draw from what the Judeo-Christian community thought about hell. So basically, what we learn from this simple activity of trying to delve into what the Bible says about hell, what we get is it's not entirely clear. And, for all we know, just reading through the Bible and biblical texts, it could mean a variety of different things, and it really only seems to be somewhat of a metaphor here. Now, just as a teaser, what we see in deeper biblical studies, as biblical scholars have delved into this much farther, there's a way in which this concept has evolved. And so it was thought about in one way, and then it kind of developed into something else. And this is why we see kind of a gap between the descriptions of the afterlife in the Old Testament and the descriptions of the afterlife in the New Testament, because there's sort of an evolution of the way the culture thought about it within that time frame. And the same thing continues to happen after the biblical texts into early Christianity. So this is just kind of an introduction into how we can think about this idea, how we can figure this stuff out just by looking through the biblical texts. And typically, it requires a lot more work beyond just reading the Bible in order to understand something like this.